Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
I said, clean them. The loud, almost metallic voice of the young groom, Enrique, rang out, directed at Nuria, who was barely holding back her tears. It was the moment when all conversations in the banquet hall suddenly fell silent, and even the music, which had been playing softly in the background, stopped. The guests froze in their places, unsure how to react. Some widened their eyes in outrage, others awkwardly lowered their gaze, while a few exchanged whispers, unable to believe that such a thing could happen at a wedding, right in the middle of the celebration. Nuria, a young woman with delicate blue eyes and a cascade of long, light brown hair, was wearing a snow-white dress custom made for her. Her eyelashes trembled as she struggled to hold back her tears, and her hands, clutching her bouquet, were reddened from tension. No one expected such cruelty from Enrique, who had just sworn vows of love and loyalty. It was as if a completely different person had taken his place before their eyes. The truth was that Enrique, lean and athletic, with short dark hair and a confident gaze, had always strived for a certain ideal of power and control. He liked being obeyed, having all eyes on him. Some saw it as initiative and leadership qualities, but others recognized it as a mask for his own insecurities, hidden beneath excessive self-confidence. Nevertheless, his romance with Nuria had seemed bright and genuine. Everyone believed their love was mutual and truly strong. No one could have imagined that on their wedding day, Enrique would publicly humiliate his wife in front of so many friends and family. "Enrique," Nuria whispered, finally looking at him. Her eyes held pain, disappointment, and a burning desire to understand what was happening. This is our wedding. We just made vows to each other." "I don't care," the groom cut her off, his lower lip trembling slightly from inattention. "I want everyone to see that you are ready to respect me and my word. So do what you're told." No one uttered a word. The parents on both sides were so stunned by this outburst that they lost their ability to speak for a moment. The bride's friends, standing nearby, exchanged shocked glances. One of them, Elena, a girl with neatly trimmed short hair and a determined nature, frowned, clenching a napkin in her hands. "Nuria, don't do it," she whispered, tugging slightly at the bride's elbow. "This is not normal." But Nuria, cornered, turned to Enrique and pressed her lips together. With a kind of bitter dignity, she averted her gaze from the guests, placed her bouquet on the table, and slowly kneeled before the groom. It seemed as though she was forcing herself, each breath sounding like a quiet sob. Her white dress rustled against the floor. Her slender fingers reached toward Enrique's polished shoes. The silence was deafening. At that moment, the scene took on an eerie absurdity. The decorative lights in the hall cast a glow on Nuria's delicate frame, making her look even more fragile. It felt as if the world was about to collapse. On a wedding day, the happiest day of a couple's life, something was happening that completely contradicted any concept of love and harmony. And then, just as Nuria's hand was about to touch the shoe, someone among the guests couldn't take it anymore. It was an old family friend of the bride, Don Campos, an elderly man with graying temples and thick eyebrows. He sprang up from his seat, shoving his chair back. The chair toppled over, its leg hitting the floor with a loud thud, shattering the silence. "Enrique, what do you think you're doing?" he exclaimed indignantly, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Have you lost your mind? Making your wife clean your shoes in front of all the guests? You're humiliating her. Is this how husbands behave?" Hearing this, Enrique narrowed his eyes, as if feeling stubbornness, or even anger, rising within him at the thought that someone had dared to challenge him in public. But before he could reply, Nuria's mother, Señora Aranda, a petite woman in her 50s with kind but sorrowful eyes, quickly approached her daughter, took her hand, and helped her up. "My dear, stop," Señora Aranda pleaded. "No, I won't allow you to be treated like this. Please, don't do this." Nuria trembled. The humiliation made her feel sick, but she had almost gone through with it out of sheer inertia. However, her mother's voice and Don Campos's support shattered the spell. The girl stood up, trying to find strength within herself. She took a deep breath and looked at Enrique, who now appeared cold and even aggressive. Quietly, she asked, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Enrique lifted his chin arrogantly. Something dark flickered in his gaze. "Because I want to see your obedience," he answered. "Because you are my wife. And there's nothing here that men wouldn't expect from their women." A murmur spread among the guests. Someone scoffed, someone covered their mouth in shock. One of Neria's younger cousins suddenly felt faint, clutching her temple as if struggling to catch her breath. But all the commotion was just a faint echo of the explosion that was about to come. This is wrong," Neria muttered, suddenly feeling a fire of resistance ignite within her. As if her friends, family, and the groom's tactless behavior all at once reignited her wounded pride. Neria, Enrique, sensing the impending wave of disapproval, grabbed her wrist and pulled her slightly to the side, away from the watchful eyes. "You have to understand, I am your husband now. In our family, things will be done as I say. I won't allow you or anyone else to disobey me. When I say clean my shoes, you do it. Let everyone see that my wife respects me. That's what I want." He spoke in a tone that might have suited a business negotiation, but not a conversation with the woman he claimed to love. Neria was in shock. Fear crept in as she realized that the man she had exchanged rings with barely an hour ago was capable of such cruelty. Yet, some inner strength prevented her from completely submitting. She tried to pull her wrist away from his grip. "Let go," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice low enough that others wouldn't hear, though many guests were already craning their necks to catch every word of their conversation. "Enrique, this is our wedding. We barely had time to kiss after signing the papers, and now I don't even understand what's happening to you. Think about what you're doing. You've never acted like this before." Something flashed in his eyes, anger, wounded pride, or both. "Don't you dare embarrass me in front of these people," he hissed. "They're the ones interfering in our relationship, not us in theirs. If I said do it, then you will." Neria's friend, Alina, had heard enough. She could no longer tolerate such injustice. Lifting the hem of her elegant cocktail dress, she took 3 determined steps toward the bride and groom, positioning herself almost between them. "She's not cleaning anything," Alina declared defiantly, looking Enrique straight in the eye. "And who gave you the right to treat someone like this? What are you, from another century? We live in the 21st century. This is barbaric." Enrique looked down at her, his cold gaze piercing. "Get out of the way," he said in a tone that, under different circumstances, would have made someone back down. "You are nobody here, and your opinion means nothing to me." "You're wrong," Alina retorted, raising an eyebrow. "I'm her best friend. And I won't let anyone treat Neria like this, especially in front of her family. Have you completely lost your mind? Don't you feel ashamed?" The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Enrique's parents, Senor and Senora Salas, sat in the far corner of the hall, throwing anxious glances at their son. On one hand, they felt they should intervene, but on the other, they didn't know how. Their son's domineering nature was nothing new to them. They had tried many times to talk to Enrique, to make him understand that control and aggression weren't the way to maintain a relationship, but youthful arrogance had always overpowered their words. "Enrique, calm down," his father said cautiously, rising from his chair. "We're at a wedding. Maybe you should just apologize?" His son shot him a reproachful look, as if to say, "Stay out of this." But before Enrique could respond, the situation took an unexpected turn. Neria, who had initially bowed under the pressure of her groom, suddenly took a deep breath, as if sinking into her thoughts. Her gaze hardened. She now understood that their marriage had turned into a monstrous form of tyranny within the very first hour. Memories flashed through her mind, her first days with Enrique, his charming courtship, his confident words, the compliments, the way he always wanted to help her. "Where is that gentleman who once cared for me?" she asked herself. The humiliation, the wounded pride, the hurt, the fear, all of it suddenly fused into a blazing resolve to stand up for herself. She stepped toward Enrique and, in front of all the guests, lifted her chin and loudly, clearly declared, "No one will ever make me humiliate myself. Not you, not anyone else. I will not clean your shoes. And if you don't like it, you can take back your gifts, take back your last name, and leave, because as a man, you have just shown that you don't respect me." The statement was so shocking that someone in the hall audibly gasped. Those who knew Nuria as a gentle and kind person never expected such sharp words from her. In that moment, a strength awakened in her, a strength she had hidden for years, perhaps even from herself. "What nonsense are you spouting?" Enrique gritted his teeth, raising an eyebrow. He glanced at the crowd and noticed that many guests had already taken out their phones, recording everything. This was unpleasant, humiliating, especially in front of an audience. "I'm speaking the truth," Nuria stood her ground. "I thought we loved each other. I thought we were partners, friends. But if you're setting conditions for me as if I were your servant, then this isn't a marriage. This is abuse. And I won't tolerate it." Alina, still standing beside her, smirked slightly, either in approval of Nuria's newfound confidence or in admiration that her friend had the courage to speak her mind. Meanwhile, Don Campos nodded in visible relief, as if silently supporting Nuria's decision. Enrique didn't know how to react. His instinct was to crush this rebellion with a sharp remark. But suddenly, he felt the ground slipping from under him. Perhaps he had never expected such defiance from quiet, compliant Nuria. He had grown used to her agreeing with him on minor things. Now, seeing that most of the guests had taken her side, he straightened up, but there was an unfamiliar hesitation in his posture. This was a new role for him, the role of a man being judged, scrutinized, looked at with disapproval. Seconds passed in tense silence. Everyone waited for Enrique's response. Finally, clenching his fists, he snapped, "Fine. Suit yourselves. This is our wedding, and you're all just making a scandal out of nothing." Grabbing a champagne bottle from the table, he stormed out into the restaurant's foyer, tossing over his shoulder, "Don't follow me if you don't want to." Nuria stood in the middle of the hall, breathing heavily. All eyes were on her. Something unthinkable had just happened. In the midst of her own wedding, the groom stormed off in a fit of rage, leaving the bride standing at the altar of her pride, deciding how to move forward. It felt as if the words "I now pronounce you husband and wife" had been spoken in another lifetime. The banquet staff, waiters, the hall administrator, stood timidly in the corners, unsure of how to proceed. The tension in the air was palpable. The guests saw the dishes on the tables, heard the faint crackling of music from the speakers, but no one dared to return to their previous merriment. Nuri, her mother whispered, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "My dear, what do we do now?" I don't know," Nuria replied, feeling tears welling up. She felt bitter, hurt, ashamed in front of everyone she knew. But most of all, she was in shock at how quickly her vision of a perfect marriage had crumbled. Her father, Senor Aranda, a tall man with graying temples, approached and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, sweetheart. We'll figure this out. Maybe he's cooled off already. Let's go talk to him and see what can be done." He knew his future son-in-law had a temper, but still hoped he would come to his senses. Seeing that the tension in the room had slightly eased, some guests exhaled. Someone whispered, "Poor girl." Others hugged each other, sincerely sympathizing with the bride. Alina and a few close friends led Nuria out of the hall, away from prying eyes, giving her a chance to compose herself and discuss everything in a smaller circle. They found themselves in a small staff room with a few chairs, a mirror, and coat hangers. It was cramped, but at least quiet and private. "Nuria, stay strong," Alina said, handing her a handkerchief to wipe her tears. "We're with you. If you need anything, we'll help. No one can force you to go back to that brute if you don't want to." Nuria looked at her friend, barely managing to wipe her tears. Inside, she was torn between hurt and love, between wanting to forgive and knowing she couldn't live like this. I loved him. I mean, I still love him, I think. I don't know. She sighed, lowering her head. We planned our life together. He never spoke to me like that in front of others before. And in general, she took a shaky breath. Of course, there were times he ordered me around, called me weak, but I thought it was just jokes, his way of teasing. I never saw him this aggressive before. She exhaled loudly, trying to calm her trembling hands. And now everything is ruined. My wedding turned into this. Rosa, another friend with minimal makeup and a warm smile, sat beside her and took Neria's hand. Listen, love is one thing, but humiliation is another. If he's acting this way on the first day, what comes next? Think about yourself. Yes, exactly. Alina nodded, squeezing Neria's shoulder. I know it hurts right now, but this is only the beginning of your marriage. And he's already showing that he thinks it's normal to command and humiliate you. Neria knew they were right. She couldn't imagine accepting such treatment. She recalled that awful moment when she had almost touched Enrique's shoes, how she had felt utterly worthless. Meanwhile, outside the room, the tension among the guests was rising. Some, tired of waiting, went into the corridor and saw Enrique sitting on a chair beside a massive flower vase. Senor Aranda approached him, trying to start a conversation. Enrique, listen, we are all very surprised, he began, his tone calm despite his anger for his humiliated daughter. I don't know what's going on in your head, but you cannot treat Neria like this. She loves you. Enrique clicked his tongue, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if battling a headache. I didn't mean to hurt her, he sighed heavily. I just wanted to show her that I am the husband, that my words matter. Maybe I didn't choose the best way. There was no best way in what you did. Senor Aranda snapped. You forced my daughter to do something that went against her dignity. What kind of husband humiliates his wife? Do you really think this is normal? Enrique clenched his fists, staring off into the distance. It's normal when a family has a leader and the other listens. Didn't your generation live that way? Senor Aranda thought back to his own parents, who had endured difficult times and believed in the idea that the husband is the head of the family. But he himself had grown up in a household where cooperation and mutual respect mattered more than blind obedience. He would never demand that his wife kneel and polish his shoes. The mere thought of it was barbaric. Young man, it is your choice to live in the past. But know this, my daughter has the right to respect, he said firmly. And I will not let you mistreat her. Enrique averted his gaze, unwilling to continue the conversation. He could feel the disgust radiating from everyone around him. Frustration swelled inside him. Why is everyone attacking me? He thought bitterly. Maybe Neria turned them all against me? Or maybe they're just ignorant people who don't understand real relationships. Back in the banquet hall, some guests had returned. A few whispered among themselves, others poured themselves wine, but no one felt like drinking. A lingering heaviness hung in the air. Some thought, it's a family matter, they should sort it out themselves. But most were on Neria's side. Soon, Alina also stepped into the corridor, determined to have a frank conversation with Enrique. She spotted him sitting alone, staring blankly into the distance now that Senor Aranda had walked away. Approaching him, she said, Listen, Enrique, I'm not here to beat you down further. I just want to understand, why did you do that to her? He cast her a quick glance, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. But after a moment of silence, he muttered, I didn't mean to humiliate her. I just wanted to show that in my family, there will be order, he mumbled. In the past, I was too soft in relationships, and women walked all over me. I decided that with Neria, that wouldn't happen. I want her to listen to me. Alina sighed, feeling a wave of distaste at his words. The way he spoke of order and obedience made her skin crawl. Listen, a family is not an army. It's a partnership. Isn't that right? She said. And you love her, don't you? Enrique remained silent for a few seconds, then looked up sharply. I do, he snapped, but I won't let myself be treated like a doormat. She needs to understand who's in charge here. Alina felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. And why do you think that if she doesn't polish your shoes, it means you're weak? Nuria never tried to control you. I've known her for years. She's always been supportive, willing to compromise. Don't you think you're overreacting? Enrique clenched his jaw. Maybe, he muttered, and I already regret how things turned out. But I'm not going to humiliate myself by apologizing in front of everyone. Alina let out a small, involuntary laugh. You don't have to apologize to everyone, though that wouldn't be a bad idea. The most important thing is to apologize to Nuria. If you want to save this marriage, you'll have to learn to communicate instead of giving orders. She's not a possession, she's a person. And you should understand that she's not going to go back out there and pretend everything is fine until she sees true remorse from you. With that, Alina turned on her heel, giving him one last meaningful look before walking back to Nuria. Left alone in the corridor, Enrique seemed to, for the first time, truly consider whether he had gone too far. But his pride, stubbornness, and fear of losing control kept him from admitting his mistake. For half an hour, the situation remained at an impasse. Guests wandered between the hall and the corridor in confusion. Some stepped outside for fresh air, whispering among themselves about what had just happened. Finally, Enrique's parents decided to approach him. Senor Salas placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Enrique, we see how you're behaving, and it's wrong. You're not a dictator. Teresa and I never raised you to treat someone you love this way. Apologize to Nuria. Otherwise, this whole wedding will be ruined. Enrique's mother, Senora Salas, a petite woman with soft features, nodded. Son, Nuria is a wonderful girl. She loves you. But if you humiliate her now, if you don't respect her, you won't be able to fix this later. We're all here for your love. Enrique shook his head, feeling a lump forming in his throat. I don't understand why everyone is against me. Because you did something unacceptable, his father said firmly. And you know it. For a split second, Enrique closed his eyes as if exhausted. Deep down, he realized that maybe he really had crossed the line. But things had gone too far now. How could he admit to everyone that he had been wrong? How could he acknowledge that he had overreacted? He had never been taught to admit mistakes. He had been raised to believe that a man is always right. He had grown up with the mistaken idea that a man should never apologize or he would lose face. But now reality was hitting him hard. If he didn't find the strength to fix this, he would lose Nuria. Finally, Enrique stood up, took a deep breath, and walked toward the small room where Nuria was with her friends and parents. A storm of emotions raged inside him: shame, anger, confusion, and perhaps frustration with himself. When he entered the room, all conversation ceased. Nuria was sitting with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. Seeing him, she frowned, watching as he slowly approached. Enrique began, feeling his ears burn. I'm sorry if things went too far. It wasn't quite an apology, but Nuria heard that he was at least trying to sound softer. So the fact that you ordered me to clean your shoes doesn't bother you? Nuria asked, her voice still filled with hurt. Enrique stepped closer and crouched down beside her. Listen, maybe I didn't say it in the best way. But I wanted to show that my word matters. But this was my very first day as your wife, Nuria whispered, trying to hold back fresh tears. And instead of love, instead of us standing together and celebrating like we dreamed, it turned into you humiliating me. Do you understand how painful it was when you forced me to kneel? Enrique lowered his gaze. He couldn't, or wouldn't, say the words Nuria needed to hear. Maybe he simply lacked the courage to admit he was wrong. He sighed. Yes, I understand it looked bad. I'm sorry if it made you uncomfortable. Alina scoffed. If. I'm sorry, Enrique repeated when her withering glare made him wince. But Nuria, let's not end our wedding in disgrace. The guests are waiting. I don't want everyone to think we're fighting on our first day as husband and wife. I love you, I really do. Nuria's heart clenched painfully. She wanted him to understand that he had made a mistake and to sincerely ask for forgiveness. But what she heard were only half measures. He still doesn't realize what he did, she thought. He just wants to save face. If you really love me, Nuria said quietly, then admit that what you did was wrong. Say that you will never do something like this again. Swear that you will never humiliate me. If you can do that, I'll return to the hall. But don't think I will forget this pain. You'll have to prove through your actions that this was a mistake and not how you truly see me. Enrique fell silent, nervously clenching and unclenching his fist. He knew that saying I promise would mean surrendering a piece of his pride, admitting that he did not have absolute control. But at the same time, he understood that there was no other way out. The wedding was falling apart. The guests had seen everything. The internet was likely already flooded with videos of him ordering his wife to clean his shoes. His parents were in shock. His friends were confused. Nuria was on the verge of leaving him. Fine, he finally said. I will never do that again. I promise. I'm sorry. Saying this, he tried to take Nuria's hand. She allowed the touch, but her hand remained cold and tense. Her tear-filled eyes still reflected a whirlwind of thoughts. Nevertheless, she lowered her head slightly, signaling that she accepted his apology, though without the carefree trust she once had. Alina looked at the groom skeptically. I hope you keep your word, she said, not hiding her doubt. Enrique stood up, said nothing, but gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that he had heard her. Fine, Nuria whispered, addressing Enrique. We will return to the guests. But I will never, ever tolerate this kind of treatment again. If it happens again, we're done. Be sure of that. These words, spoken in the tiny room, sounded almost like a sentence. Whether Enrique fully grasped the seriousness of the consequences was unclear. But Nuria already felt within herself that she had set a boundary. And if he crossed it again, she would never be able to forgive him. They stepped out into the corridor together, and under the watchful eyes of the guests, returned to the banquet hall. The atmosphere was still tense. The waiters shifted hesitantly, and one of the musicians played a quiet melody, stopping now and then, uncertain of how to proceed in such a situation. When the guests saw the bride and groom enter together, whispers spread through the room. Many exchanged glances, trying to decipher whether they had truly reconciled. Nuria and Enrique stopped near the main table. She looked around, searching for the people closest to her, her mother, father, and friends, those who truly cared about her. Then, gathering her strength, she spoke loudly. Dear guests, I'm sorry for making you worry. Every family has its moments. But Enrique and I want to tell you that we will continue this evening so that we do not part on a bad note. I am grateful to everyone who supported me in this difficult moment. I hope that from now on, we will remember that a wedding is a celebration of love and mutual respect. Enrique listened with his gaze lowered. Then, mustering his courage, he looked at everyone and spoke. Yes, I apologize for being so short-tempered, he said, his voice quiet, avoiding specifics but still acknowledging his guilt. I love Nuria, and I have no intention of hurting her. Let's not ruin this day completely. Some guests sighed in relief, others shook their heads doubtfully. But a fragile truce seemed to settle in the air. Soon, soft background music resumed. The waiters started serving hot dishes again, trying to revive the festive atmosphere. The celebration had been wounded, but it wasn't entirely dead. Friends and relatives closest to the couple began encouraging Nuria, saying, Maybe it was just a nervous breakdown. He's young, hot-blooded, give him a chance. Others, more skeptical, warned her. Be careful. If he allowed himself this on your wedding day, what will he do in the future? But Nuria didn't want to make a final judgment in the middle of the wedding. She only watched the hall with a quiet sadness, seeing how some guests tried to dance, some chatted peacefully, while others continued discussing her and Enrique, casting sidelong glances. Slowly, the evening began to move past the initial shock. However, no one could predict the lasting impact of this humiliating incident on their relationships within the family and among their friends. And more importantly, no one could have imagined what would happen just a few hours later and the thoughts it would stir among everyone present. In the same hall, sometime later, the host, a charismatic man with a trademark smile and well-rehearsed jokes, named Victor, decided to resume the official part of the celebration. He stepped up to the microphone, glanced around the guests, and after clearing his throat somewhat nervously, began speaking. "Friends, let's not lose the festive spirit. Today, we are here to celebrate the love of Enrique and Nuria. Well, we had a little misunderstanding. After all, we're all human, right? I propose a toast to the strength of their love, to understanding, respect, and a lifetime of happiness together." The guests exchanged uneasy glances but raised their glasses. Some were genuinely relieved, believing that the storm had passed and hoping for the best. Others, especially those familiar with Enrique's temperament, remained wary. "To love." A few voices called out, and the clinking of glasses echoed through the hall. Nuria and Enrique sat side by side, but an invisible wall stood between them. Yes, he held her hand, but it felt like a mere formality. Yes, she smiled at the guests, but her smile was tired and forced. The earlier incident with the shoes hung over them like a shadow, tainting everything that followed. Trying to lighten the mood, Victor suggested a game called Guess the Bride, where the groom, blindfolded, had to identify his wife by touching her hand or recognizing her voice. The game was supposed to bring laughter and applause. Enrique reluctantly stood up, let them blindfold him, and several women, including Nuria, were lined up for the game. One by one, he touched their wrists, then hesitated before finally saying, "This is Nuria." One of his friends, half-jokingly, commented, "Maybe say my wife?" Enrique just shrugged. The guests had no illusions, there was no genuine reconciliation between them. Everyone could feel that the newlyweds were merely keeping up appearances to avoid turning the wedding into a complete disaster. Even the parents' toasts sounded forced. Nuria's mother, speaking about how her daughter had always dreamed of a great love and a strong family, couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. And when she finished her toast with the words, "I hope you will live a long and happy life together," her eyes glistened with tears. Everyone understood what she was feeling: worry, sadness, disappointment. But the most unexpected thing happened later in the evening, when some guests, exhausted from the emotional turmoil, had already left, while the closest ones remained to see the newlyweds off. One of the guests at the wedding was Enrique's longtime friend, Antonio, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-20s, always cheerful and easygoing. He and Enrique had studied together in the sports faculty and later became coaches. But Antonio, being naturally good-natured, always avoided conflicts in their friendship. When the shoe incident happened, Antonio had been shocked. He had never seen Enrique behave this way toward a woman. After the ceremony, Antonio tried to talk to Enrique, but he either brushed him off or remained silent. "Enrique, at least explain what's going on," Antonio whispered insistently at one point. "You've never acted like this before. Why did you humiliate Nuria?" "Just drop it," Enrique hissed back. "It's none of your business." Antonio backed off but could see his friend was tense and on edge. And so, as the wedding neared its end, Antonio decided to make one last attempt to understand what was on Enrique's mind and perhaps help him. He found him near the restrooms, standing alone, leaning against the wall. "Enrique, buddy, let's talk," Antonio said quietly. "There's nothing to talk about," Enrique replied, his voice strained. "Damn it, everything went wrong. I thought I needed to show I was the man in the relationship, and instead, I made things worse." "Look, you know I've always been on your side," Antonio said. "But this time, you messed up. If you don't change, you're going to lose Nuria." She's already hurt, scared, and her whole family is against what you did. I know, Enrique muttered, turning to face the wall. But damn it, I just can't get past this. My whole life, I was taught never to show weakness. And Nuria, she seems too sweet, too nice. I was afraid she was just pretending, that later she would. He trailed off, seemingly struggling to put his fears into words. Antonio placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Maybe it's time to realize that not everything they drilled into us was right. We grow up, life changes, and we have to change with it. Look at how much Nuria loves you. She basically gave you a chance today. And if you don't take it. Enrique was silent for a few seconds, biting his lip, then suddenly pushed himself away from the wall. Yeah, maybe you're right. I need to talk to her alone. I need to tell her that I want to change things for the better, that I won't pull any more of these crazy stunts. But damn, how do I even say it to her if? Just say it sincerely, Antonio advised. Like a real man. No putting on a show, no hints. Tell her you love her. And if you truly do, prove it. Enrique clenched his fists, remained silent for a little while longer, then nodded. It seemed as if something had finally clicked inside him. Maybe, for the first time, he realized that being a real man wasn't about saying clean my shoes, but about being able to admit his mistakes and respect the woman he loved. All right, he finally said. I'll try. They returned to the hall, where the final song of the evening was playing. Some guests had already left, but the closest one stayed behind, waiting for the resolution. Nuria's parents sat with solemn faces, exchanging quiet words. The bride herself was with her sisters and a few close friends. They were talking, and by their expressions, it was clear that Nuria was still upset but trying to maintain an air of composure. When she saw Enrique approaching, she tensed, as if bracing for another unpleasant scene. But he came up to her, looking her directly in the eyes, took her hand, and, to everyone's surprise, said, "Can we step outside and talk? I want to explain myself. Just the two of us." Nuria looked at him with hesitation but then nodded. Okay. They left the banquet hall, walked through the corridor, past the coat room, and stepped outside, where a few guests' cars were parked. Night had already fallen. Stars were beginning to light up the sky. The streets were mostly empty, with only the occasional passerby glancing curiously at the newlyweds in their wedding attire. Enrique stopped next to Nuria, let out a sigh, and looked at her. In that moment, it was clear how tormented he felt inside, how hard it was for him to start this conversation. Finally, he spoke in a quiet voice. "Nuria, I want to say that I'm ashamed of what I did. I've already apologized, but I know it wasn't completely sincere. I'm sorry for hurting you. That was unacceptable, no matter the time, no matter the relationship. I acted like a dictator, and only now do I realize how disgusting and low that was." Nuria was touched by his words. She felt the icy weight of resentment inside her start to shift. Yes, she had wanted to hear this. But still, she asked, "Why did you do it? Why, of all days, on our wedding day, did you decide to show your dominance?" Enrique looked away. "I had this belief in my head, the man is the leader, the woman is his support, she should listen to him. Maybe it came from how I was raised. Maybe it was watching how my father spoke to my mother. He never hurt her, but his tone was always commanding. And I was afraid that if I didn't show my strength from the start, you would end up controlling me. But now I see how stupid and unfair that was." Nuria listened intently. She realized she was seeing Enrique now, perhaps, more sincerely than ever before. "Did I ever give you a reason to think I wanted to control you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I always tried to be considerate. We always compromised on little things. And if I ever asked you for something, you could have just told me why you didn't want to do it." Enrique lowered his head. "I know. It's just all these insecurities, fears. I don't even know how to explain it properly. I'm sorry. I really love you. I ruined our wedding. I know this won't be easy to forget. But I'm asking you, give me a chance to show that I can be different. That I can be a husband who doesn't give orders but loves and supports his wife. Nuria's lower lip trembled. The tears she had been holding back, tears that had been pulsing in her heart, slowly began to escape. But they were no longer just tears of hurt, they were also tears of relief that he finally understood. There's one thing I need you to understand, she said, her voice quiet but firm. If you ever act this way again, I will leave without hesitation. But if you are truly willing to change, then we can try to move forward. I will support you, help you with your goals. But only without these commands. Enrique nodded, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. I'm ready to try, he promised. Nuria closed her eyes, letting her tears flow, and took a step toward him. He hesitantly wrapped his arms around her, and she didn't pull away. From the outside, it must have looked touching, under the night sky, dressed in wedding attire, a bride and groom who had just gone through an enormous conflict, now standing in each other's arms, trying to mend the shattered pieces of their night. At that moment, a group of young men, likely coming from a party, passed by and, noticing the couple, called out in surprise. Oh, look! A wedding! Congratulations! The couple turned toward them. Instead of snapping at them like he might have before, Enrique simply nodded and politely said, Thank you. Nuria gave a faint smile. This moment felt like a strange epilogue to an unusual wedding. After standing in each other's embrace for a few more minutes, they decided to return to the hall, to at least end the evening in a somewhat normal atmosphere. As they walked back, Nuria felt as if the thick tension between her and Enrique was slowly dissipating, like a storm that had passed but left behind a sky still heavy with clouds. She wanted to believe that if Enrique was truly willing to change, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope. When they re-entered the hall, the host was wrapping up the evening's program, and many guests were preparing to leave. Nuria's parents rushed toward her, asking, Sweetheart, is everything all right? More or less, Mom, Dad, Nuria replied with a quiet smile. Enrique understands now. We talked. I really want to believe things will be different. Her parents nodded, embracing her and, surprisingly, also Enrique, though just an hour ago, they had wanted to call him every insult in the book. But for their daughter's happiness, they were willing to give him a chance. The night was ending, but the real test for their marriage had only just begun. Elena, watching everything from the sidelines, stepped closer and narrowed her eyes at Enrique. Well, I hope you don't deceive our Nuria. Enrique sighed. I'll try not to. I'll be watching, Elena smirked. With those words, Nuria felt a fresh wave of exhaustion and emotions washing over her. Yet at the same time, she felt relieved that, at least by the end of the evening, things had finally shifted from a deadlock. The next day, the newlyweds woke up in the apartment they had rented temporarily before buying a place of their own. The wedding dress and suit hung on the chairs, already wrinkled and no longer fresh. Inside both of them, there was a lingering heaviness from the events they had lived through. Nuria was the first to open her eyes. She saw Enrique lying beside her, still dozing, his forehead furrowed as if he was reliving everything in his dreams. The nightmare of the previous day flashed through her memory. But now there was no loud music, no guests, no chaos, just the silence of their bedroom and a moment to finally process everything. Nuria felt a mix of emotions, hurt, pain, and hope. Did she want to stay with him? Yes, she did. Because she loved him. But everything depended on Enrique now. Sensing her movements, her husband, now officially her husband, opened his eyes. For a moment, there was confusion in them. Then he sat up in bed, ruffling his hair, and saw Nuria sitting beside him, looking at him. Hey, he murmured. Hey, she responded quietly. Silence hung between them. Both were thinking about how to start the conversation. Finally, Enrique spoke. I barely slept all night. I kept replaying the moment I made you clean my shoes. I feel so ashamed I don't even know how I'm supposed to live with this. Nuria frowned slightly, recalling the storm of emotions that command had caused inside her. If you truly regret it, then we both have to work on our relationship. I can't just forget what happened. I understand, he sighed. I'm willing to do anything, as long as you don't leave. He reached out and took her hand. Nuria let him. For the first time, they touched voluntarily. There was sincerity in his gaze. And one more thing, Nuria said. We need to discuss what happens next because our parents saw everything. Everyone is talking about us now. There's probably already a video online of me kneeling, I'm sure of it. Enrique covered his face with his hand. Oh God, social media, he exhaled heavily. Yes, now everyone will be talking about it. But the most important thing is for us to figure things out between ourselves, Nuria continued. I don't want to live in fear, wondering if you'll humiliate me again or, worse, hit me if you get angry. Enrique looked her in the eyes. I would never raise my hand against you, he said. I would swear on anything if you needed me to. Words mean nothing, Nuria interrupted. Show it through actions. Let's start with you seeing a therapist, or maybe even a couples counselor with me, to work through these outdated beliefs about controlling your wife. Enrique pressed his lips together, clearly not thrilled by the idea of seeing a psychologist. But he quickly realized that this might be the only way. Fine, he agreed. I'll go if you think we need it. I do, Nuria nodded. I might need help too, just to regain my balance. They spoke about it for a little while longer. It felt unnatural for Enrique, even frightening, to admit he might need professional help. But if that was the only way to save their marriage, he was willing to try. The day passed in solitude, as the newlyweds needed time to process everything. They didn't visit their parents, nor did they go to the photo shoot that had been planned for the next day. Instead, they canceled everything. Nuria called the photographer, saying that due to unforeseen circumstances, the session wouldn't happen. He was surprised but accepted it. They also didn't post any wedding photos online with hashtags like #happily-married, as newlyweds usually do. Instead, they sat in the kitchen, eating pizza and discussing how they would move forward in their relationship. Sometimes there were long pauses, moments to reflect on the scale of what had happened. But compared to the previous day, today felt much calmer. Enrique made an effort to speak softly, to keep his temper in check whenever something bothered him. Nuria, however, caught herself wondering if this was just the temporary effect of guilt, and she kept asking herself, what happens next? But she decided to give him a chance. The family discussion, however, was inevitable. The next morning, while scrolling through social media, Nuria saw several posts from both acquaintances and strangers. One of them read, I've never seen anything more outrageous at a wedding. The groom forced the bride to clean his shoes. The bride was humiliated in front of all the guests. There were photos and clips of the moment Nuria was kneeling. The comments were full of outrage. What kind of tyrant is this? How did she even agree to that? He's definitely going to hit her. Nuria felt sick reading it. She had never wanted to become a topic for public discussion, but reality had other plans. Meanwhile, the phone call started. Her Aunt Carla, who hadn't been able to attend the wedding, had heard about the scandal and called to ask. Sweetheart, I heard something awful. Is it true? Did Enrique really make you clean his shoes? Darling, can't you stand up for yourself? Nuria smirked bitterly and answered tiredly. Aunt Carla, yes, something terrible happened, but I already talked to Enrique. We're working it out. It's not as simple as it looks in the videos. Not as simple? Oh, come on. No, sweetheart, abuse is abuse. Leave him before it's too late, her aunt exclaimed. Nuria understood her reaction but didn't want to keep arguing. She made an excuse about being busy and hung up. But Aunt Carla wasn't the only one. Messages kept coming. Some people were condemning, others were offering sympathy. Elena, her best friend, suggested she move in with her and leave that maniac behind. Nuria's parents wanted to come over and talk, urging her to seriously consider divorce before they got too deep into married life. Enrique, watching the flood of online discussion, realized the situation had grown far beyond a private conflict. He felt ashamed and frustrated, seeing people calling him a tyrant, a caveman, a real monster in the comments. But he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. He avoided social media, but when his friends called, all he could say was, "Yeah, that happened. I've already apologized. Things will get better soon." But that didn't do much to fix things. "Listen, Nuria, maybe we should leave for a while?" Enrique suggested one evening. "Until this all blows over." Nuria, lying on the couch with her phone, turned to him. "Leave? Where?" "I don't know. Out of town, to the sea, the mountains, anywhere. Just to get away from the stares, the questions." "I don't mind," Nuria agreed. "But I'm not sure running away will solve our problems." "Isn't that exactly what we need?" Enrique shrugged. And so, the idea of spending their honeymoon somewhere secluded was born, a place where no one knew them, where they could be alone. The next day, they made arrangements to rent a small countryside house that some acquaintances had used before. It was by a river, surrounded by a pine forest, offering an escape from prying eyes. They booked tickets and arranged a rental car. 2 days after their wedding, the newlyweds left the noisy city behind. Nuria's parents were somewhat worried, but she reassured them. "We just want to be alone for a while and think things through." Alina shook her head, afraid that Enrique might seriously hurt her friend once they were alone. But Nuria firmly stated that she trusted him not to give in to his impulses and that she needed to understand whether they still had a chance at a happy marriage. When they arrived at the cabin surrounded by pine trees, silence greeted them, broken only by the sound of the wind. Inside, they found simple yet cozy furnishings, wooden furniture, a large bed, and a fireplace. That first evening, they simply sat by the window, watching the twilight settle over the forest. Nuria clutched a blanket around herself, reflecting on the trials her love had endured. Enrique, seemingly unsure of how to start a conversation, did his best to be gentle. He offered her hot chocolate, helped unpack their things, and stayed close without pressuring her. That night, Nuria woke up from a nightmare. She dreamed she was in her wedding dress, kneeling, while people around her laughed, pointing their cameras at her. In the dream, Enrique loudly ordered her to crawl and clean not only his shoes, but something even more degrading. She screamed and woke up in tears. "Nuria, what's wrong?" Enrique stirred immediately. She sat up in bed, trembling. "I saw it again. It's haunting me." Enrique pulled her into his arms, trying to soothe her. Shoo, it's okay, I'm here. I'm so sorry. This is my fault." She sniffled. "It's just a dream, yes, but I can't forget it. I'm afraid you'll do something like that again." "I won't," he said firmly, holding her tighter. "I will do my best to change. I swear, if I can just overcome all these barriers inside me." As she leaned against him, Nuria realized how deeply the humiliation had scarred her. Even if Enrique tried, she herself would have to work through her trauma. They didn't spend their honeymoon like a typical happy couple. Instead, they treated it as a rehabilitation period for their relationship. Instead of romantic walks, they had deep conversations about fears, principles, and the rules of their future life together. Instead of passionate nights, they spent hours talking, sometimes arguing, sometimes crying, sometimes making peace. One evening, Nuria said, "You know, when we first met, you seemed so reliable, strong, and confident. I liked that because I've always been more soft-spoken, reserved. But I never wanted your confidence to turn into tyranny." Enrique responded, "I didn't even realize I had this ugliness inside me. I thought I was just a man who stood his ground. But now I see that it had nothing to do with true masculinity. True masculinity is responsibility, care, and the ability to admit your mistakes," Nuria added softly. Enrique sighed. "I take responsibility. and I will take care of us. I promise, Nuria, you will never have to clean my shoes or anything like that, he said with a bitter smirk, but she could tell there was newfound sincerity in his words. At least, he was trying. And that gave her hope. They walked through the forest, breathing in the scent of pine. They sat by the river, silent. Sometimes they wanted to cry, other times they wanted to laugh. Enrique told her how his father had taught him that a man should always be the head of the household, that a woman should obey. His mother had always followed his father's commands without question. But I never noticed that she was afraid of him, that there was pain in her eyes sometimes, he admitted. Only now, with an adult's perspective, did he begin to understand that the family he had idolized had been built on fear and submission rather than respect. Their honeymoon lasted a week. During that time, they learned to talk to each other more openly, though the shadow of the wedding incident never fully disappeared. Nuria became more certain that if Enrique ever reverted to his old ways, she would file for divorce without hesitation. Enrique, on the other hand, knew that any misstep would come at a high cost. So he truly tried, not raising his voice, not giving orders, but negotiating instead. For the first time, their relationship felt mature, though they had arrived at that point through pain. When they returned from their honeymoon, they decided to see a couples therapist. Nuria found a private clinic where a middle-aged specialist, Raquel Casado, with a kind gaze and a calm voice, held sessions. At their very first appointment, Enrique, though struggling, recounted what had happened at the wedding. Raquel asked him pointed questions. How did you perceive relationships with women before this incident? Why did you believe that a woman should reinforce your authority? What made you so sure that proving your masculinity required humiliating your partner? Enrique carefully chose his words as he answered, recalling scenes from his childhood, repeating his father's phrases. Nuria sat beside him, sometimes adding her own observations, describing what she had seen in Enrique's interactions with his parents. The psychologist listened attentively and agreed that Nuria was now dealing with post-traumatic stress from what had happened. She explained that for trust to be rebuilt, Enrique would have to show consistent care, patience, and prove, through his actions, not just words, that he was no longer the same man who had ordered her to kneel. When they left the session, they both felt drained, but there was a sense that they had taken an important step. Their therapy sessions became regular. They explored their relationship dynamics, learned communication techniques, how to make requests without giving orders, how to discuss problems without raising voices, how to share emotions without shame. Life, of course, continued. Enrique worked as a fitness trainer, Nuria as a receptionist at a beauty salon. Their days were filled with routine and client interactions. Occasionally, work stress tested their relationship again. But Enrique managed to control himself. Sometimes he would say sharply, "Don't talk to me right now, I'm exhausted." But there were no insults, no threats, no humiliation. Seeing these positive changes, Nuria tried to believe that they could truly build a harmonious family. But public opinion was still a factor. People around them reacted differently. Some said, "Good for you both for making it work. You didn't give up on each other." Others judged Nuria, calling her weak. She let him get away with it. He'll crush her again, just wait. On social media, Nuria blocked some of the nastier commenters. But the wedding video continued to circulate. Several times, local journalists reached out, offering her a chance to share her side of the story. She declined. She didn't want to turn her pain into clickbait. Enrique, meanwhile, faced consequences in his own way. One day at the gym, a few former clients recognized him. "Oh, look, it's that asshole from the wedding," one sneered. Enrique felt a wave of shame. He was starting to understand just how long a single public mistake could haunt someone. But instead of arguing or making excuses, he clenched his jaw and focused on his work. That evening, he told Nuria about the encounter. He admitted that he felt ashamed and humiliated. Despite her own emotional wounds, Nuria hugged him and said, If you truly change, it doesn't matter what people who only saw one internet clip think. What matters is that I see the real you. Enrique nodded. Those words meant everything to him. Months passed. The wedding scandal gradually faded from the gossip circuit as new events took its place. Within Nuria and Enrique's home, a fragile balance was forming. Yes, there were still disagreements, everyday struggles, financial disputes, but nothing ever happened again that even remotely resembled humiliation of one partner by the other. Their psychologist helped both of them build a new foundation for their marriage. Nuria slowly freed herself from the constant fear that her husband might suddenly command her to do something degrading. Enrique, step by step, let go of his old beliefs. At first, Nuria's parents had begged her to get a divorce, but as they watched their daughter grow calmer, smile more, and seem at peace, they started to soften. They gradually accepted Enrique, especially after he openly apologized to them several times and demonstrated his willingness to take responsibility. They still kept a watchful eye on his behavior, but they could see he was making an effort. Aunt Carla and other relatives, who had initially been the most critical, eventually let go of their judgment. Elena, Nuria's best friend, remained cautious, but there came a moment that shifted her perspective. She watched Enrique help Nuria organize a charity event at the salon. He was her right-hand man, never raising his voice, showing patience and support. "All right, looks like he really is trying," Elena finally admitted. He kept his word. And so, nearly 6 months after their tumultuous wedding, Nuria and Enrique decided to gather the same people who had attended their marriage ceremony. They wanted to host a reconciliation dinner to show everyone, in person, that they had overcome their struggles. They rented a small, cozy restaurant and invited family and friends. It wasn't a grand banquet, but rather an intimate gathering with a warm and friendly atmosphere. Nuria, in a beautiful summer dress, and Enrique, in light trousers and a button-down shirt, greeted guests at the entrance. Some arrived hesitantly, unsure of what kind of mood to expect. But soon, they saw that the couple interacted respectfully, spoke to each other kindly, exchanged smiles, and even shared occasional gentle kisses. Once everyone was seated, Enrique raised his glass and spoke. "Friends, I want to take this evening as an opportunity to say, once again, that I am sorry. I apologize to all of you for the terrible scene you had to witness 6 months ago. Most of all, I apologize to my beloved wife, who endured the most humiliating moment of her life because of me. I was wrong, and as a man, it is difficult to admit, but it is the truth. Thank you, Nuria, for giving me a chance." The room fell silent as guests listened. Some smiled, others nodded in approval. Elena glanced at Nuria, noticing the tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of pride. Pride that Enrique wasn't afraid to speak these words in front of others. Then Nuria raised her glass. "Friends, you all know that our marriage began with difficult trials. But today, we want to show that love can overcome anything when people are willing to change and forgive. Enrique has done an enormous amount of work on himself, and we both have learned so much through therapy. Now, we are stronger than before. Thank you to everyone who supported me, who encouraged me to stand my ground and leave if necessary. And thank you to those who supported Enrique when he felt the world was against him. We love each other and want to walk this path together. To us, friends." Guests raised their glasses, and a few clapped softly. Conversations resumed, the air filled with quiet laughter and discussions about life. Sometimes, life throws situations at us that can destroy everything. More often than not, it is parents who instill cruelty in their children, whether intentionally or by accident. And then, young people are left with only one choice, to fight for a chance to eradicate that darkness within themselves.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.